I put it right in her hand.
Anxious any?
So, we are going to cover what we covered with the administrators. And what's great about our time together is that we'll be able to go much slower and respond to questions or thoughts, or even just for those of you that were able to stay the entire time, maybe in between that time when you were at that workshop and now you have some questions, or you've been looking at things differently. And so this is a place really for us to have some conversation. So again, I'm going to slow down the process, but I'm going to take us through many of the same things that I had shared with the administrators. My goal is to always put organizations on the same page, so that you have the same language and understanding of what is this work that we are doing? What does this journey look like that we are embarking on? And what is the work that we need to do? So in my mind, it's really a roadmap. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself. Some of you have already heard this story. And feel free, again, instead of having 100 people in the room, we have about 10 people in the room. So we can make this a very interactive, kind of engaging time together. I prefer to stand. I diagnosed myself with ADHD in grad school. I did. I was flipping through that DSM and I was like, oh, that's why I can't sit still. So for a little bit though, I do also I think there's a cultural piece to that as well, in that it's not uncommon for people that identify as African American to speak through our bodies, right? To engage, to use hand movement. And things like that. So sitting down is very difficult, but I also want to welcome you to stand up and stretch, and kind of outside of that kind of Eurocentric model that says this is the way we sit and listen, that you do what works for you for staying present. And I feel the need to say that simply because in these conversations, which are so sensitive, everybody's kind of watching our moves, and we got a camera back here, and that we do a lot of interpreting of what we think people's behaviors are in these conversations. And so I like to name that. When I do these workshops, sometimes people will come up to me and say, I'm going to leave a little early, I just want you to know. And I know what they're saying is I'm not leaving because I'm disinterested. And I need you to know that, so you won't see me as that person who's checking out. I would just love to hear, as I have you all in the room together, if you wouldn't mind going around and saying your name. Do you have children in the district? How long have you served on the board? And I'd also love to hear what is your experience around having formal conversations around issues of equity, social justice, inclusion, whether it be race, gender, sexual orientation in class. For me, the first time was graduate school, so I'm often I'm not surprised that sometimes when I'm going into spaces, it's the first time that people have engaged in this way. Can I start with you, Amy?
Sure.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm starting my third year on the school board.
Okay.
I have 3 children. My youngest is starting his 2nd year at university. I have a high schooler and a junior high student also in the district.
Okay.
So, and then my experience with this area of work probably started in university. I was resident assistant in the dorm, and we did a fair amount of training, for the EAs.
Yeah.
And then in the corporate world as well.
Oh, did you do some in the corporate world? Oh, excellent.
I worked for AT&T for a while.
Okay.
So they were, again, this is the early 90s, so I think it's still not up to this level of detail, but I have a little bit of exposure to it.
Yeah. Well, and we're getting more and more detailed, aren't we? I mean, this work in the body and the research and the literature that's out there. I remember in graduate school going to a conference with psychologists of color in the room. It was a race matters kind of conversation. And I'm looking at all of these people and realizing they're still alive, right? This isn't back in the Freud days, right? That many people are really just joining us in talking about it. So anyway, excellent, thank you.
So
believe you've been on it 3 years.
Beginning.
Or third year. So I've been on the board 6 years, and I also have 3 kids. A senior in college, a freshman in college, and a freshman in high school.
Okay, okay, excellent. And what about you as far as having conversations about diversity?
So formally, in law school, I had classes in critical legal studies, and also again 90s, so a bit to go. And then my focus was Indian law, and then so I currently work with Indigenous.
Oh, excellent. Okay, excellent. Thank you. That's an area that I don't, our native community, our native brothers and sisters, that's an area where I still have a lot of work to grow. Yeah, thank you. So many different tribes and cultures, and yeah, thank you. What about for you?
So I'm Dawn.
Yeah, I was getting ready to grab your name.
Sorry.
I wish my memory, I turned 50 this week, by the way. And I wish that my memory, that I could just remember all of your names, but I don't have it like that.
Wait, isn't that a stereotype?
Yeah, well, everybody I know seems to say that their memory is going.
So I'm Dawn, and I have 6 children. I've been on the board 8 years now. This is the 8th year. I'm finishing my 2nd term. I'm expecting my 6th grandchild, so there's 6 grandchildren and 6 children. A nice even thing. And where I've had formal conversations about this, so that's a little bit different because I have a lot of casual conversations about this. Right, but formal conversations, I guess you could apply. A committee I served on at the state level, making recommendations to the governor, who was then Gregoire, about the education piece of healthcare funding piece. So I served on a committee representing the PTA because the PTA said, who do we have that's ethnic? And they were looking around and they had me because I'm of Choctaw descendancy. So they said, well, let's send Dawn, and I was probably the whitest ethnic person in the room. But it was an interesting conversation, watching all of the different forces that were interested in an outcome and what that looked like on that. And then I also participate occasionally when I can with our Native American consortium, what's it called, with Larry?
Washington.
Yeah.
The formal name escapes me, but it's
Okay,
Washington.
good, thanks. The formal name escapes me too. But
Does it have anything to do with memory and age?
because I don't accept that one.
Okay, deny the research.
So that I've attended a number of things, either powwows, which are totally fun, or roundtable discussions and study sessions and trainings on inclusion.
Okay. Did you grow up, or even now as an adult, do you identify as Choctaw, or did you grow up identifying as white? What is your identity?
I grew up identifying as both.
As multiracial. Okay,
Yeah,
excellent.
because my father looked much more Native American, and his father.
Okay.
And his father actually left the Reds. So I grew up with both, however, because my mother didn't like being ignored. So
Your mother didn't what?
like being ignored as her
Oh.
contribution into my Rachel mix. So she was like, yeah, and you're white, hello.
Yeah.
So I grew up with a great deal of the way I was raised was a great deal of pride in both cultures.
Nice, nice. It doesn't always happen for a lot of people, multiracial identity,
Right.
particularly Native American. Yeah, it's an example of the impact of institutional racism. We'll get into that later. What about for you?
I have 4 children,
Okay.
26 down to 9,
Okay.
all mine,
Okay.
birth them all. And my informal introduction into this area was growing up as in an Italian immigrant family. So my grandfather immigrated here, and they grew up on the East Coast. You know, the East Coast is very different. It's segregated by the different Italians, Irish, you know, all the different nationalities. And so my grandfather was very strong, and, you know, we grew up with all the racist titles like Dago. We named our dog Dago. And, you know, and it gets sad. I mean, and when I hear that all Europeans being lumped together, I see it as very different.
Yeah.
And so, because I self-identify as Italian, when you're talking about the hand language and the body language, that's very different than English to me. And those cultures have clashed for years and years, especially Southern Italians, which is where we're from. So a very strong Italian identity. And then grew up on as a free reduced lunch kid, so felt the stereotypes with a single mom, and which is my passion for advocacy. And formally went back and started a master's program, and had never heard, you know, because it really wasn't until 1997, I think, where they started doing multicultural psychology, approximately at that time when they started doing research on it, and that really was my introduction into what multicultural psychology. I remember just not getting it at first, because it was so foreign to all of us, but had an amazing professor, and then just, like I told you prior, the social justice, social advocacy that is just drilled into our heads. And then from there, I teach sociology, so we use a lot of these different concepts in the curriculum, so that's been my more formal introduction.
Excellent.
Sounds somewhat similar to your schooling.
Yeah, where do you teach?
Over at Northwest University, but I teach in an adult program, just people coming back, so that's a whole different culture in and of itself.
Yeah.
And, you know, you get a lot of people with career changes, or a lot of people that are single moms, a lot of people that never were able to complete their degree for one reason or another. So there's usually something there that they want to overcome.
Thank you.
I'm one of those that's back in school.
Oh, okay, excellent.
And about 2 or 3 years ago, I took the first formal introduction was a multicultural history class. And rocked my world.
Yeah.
You know, just a different perspective. It was taught by a Latino man.
Okay.
Just fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think about white privilege for the first time. It seems odd that I would get to this age without really getting it at that level, but really very fascinating. And then I have had a couple of opportunities through school board work to do the racial equity university trainings as well. And I've been on the board for 9.5 years.
Once you're, you know, when you say kind of, it seems kind of odd, but once your lens shifts, right, from these experiences, William Cross and others in their identity development models refer to it as an encounter moment. And we wonder, like, how is it that we're just now learning about this? And yet, I think for me it makes sense, given that this isn't something that our society does a good job of educating us around, right? I mean, that is a part of our culture, which is to not talk about difference. We want to talk about similarities. We don't want to talk about differences in experiences, particularly if those differences in experiences elicits a kind of a societal or community guilt or shame around, you know, around our history. I'm curious to know if you even recall what book you used or books you used in your history course.
Yeah, I might need a look at you.
Okay. I used, for my class, I was asking, because I used Takaki's book, A Different Mirror. And so I didn't know if that was familiar to you at all.
That wasn't the core book. Sorry, I don't.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah. The other interesting, I grew up in Minneapolis, North Minneapolis. Black people lived on the other side of the creek, and we lived on this side. But I have no clear recollection if we attended the same schools. Talking to my sister about it, and she thinks that we did. But,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just
Thank you. What about for you, Superintendent?
Well, so I'm starting my 8th year in the district. I beat you to 50 by about 6 weeks.
What? Well, happy birthday. You're Leo,
thanks, you too.
Oh, are you a Cancer?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
And I don't think it's that you lose memory, I think you just have too many things to remember.
Oh, is that what it is? I like that
that's my
reframe.
theory, yeah.
Okay.
And I would say my first exposure to these topics would have been very informal and an abrupt introduction. When I was a freshman in college, I took a job on Capitol Hill in Seattle, and as a born and bred Mount Lake Terrace boy, entered a very ethnically, racially,
In every way you can
sexual
imagine,
orientation,
yeah.
diverse
Wait, where did you
environment
work?
that was-
No, where in Capitol Hill?
I was at Group Health Hospital.
Okay.
Oh.
I say I've lived
We
up
worked
there.
there together, didn't even know it. I used to work there. I used to live up on Capitol Hill.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I worked in medical records, but I could probably tell you the year from probably about 88 or so, somewhere in there.
I was in acute care, C4, probably from 83 to 88 maybe.
Yeah, see, we were right there together, yeah. I was the cute girl working in the mailroom. All right, so, my first formal, I've always been talking about race in some way, shape or form, but mostly in a very, in a kind of non-professional settings. And so I went all through undergraduate school without really diving into the conversation. There weren't classes to take. And I went to graduate school in Los Angeles at California School of Professional Psychology and minored in multicultural and community psychology. And it was really my first experience of coming together in these spaces, probably 12 to 15 students sitting around a table and diving into conversations about the dynamics of difference. And that experience of graduate school, the entire 4 years we spent looking at our profession through the lens of difference, and those four years changed my life, really, because it helped me to look at the ways that I had taken in messages and how I then lived those messages out in my life, and how those messages that I've taken in do harm to other people and even do harm to my own sense of self. And so I have found, this is what I find, the journey was one where I found myself crying, I found myself angry, I found myself literally on this emotional roller coaster trying to make sense of my experiences and trying to develop my lens. And there is a freedom in being able to not know everything. There is a freedom in being able to make mistakes and offend and not worry so much about how other people will see you, because you realize that we're all making mistakes and we're all offending in this, and that it's really, the secret is in not avoiding making the mistakes. The secret is coming to these spaces and having the conversations where we can learn and grow together. Now, this is a professional environment, so people out in the world kind of living their lives are not going to necessarily give you some of the same grace that we might give each other in these settings. But even then, when I offend people in my everyday kind of spaces, to be able to look at and see, well, this is where they're at. This is what might be going on for them, rather than before I used to take it all in as if there was something wrong with me. So I don't come to these conversations with the solutions or with the answers. I come with helping us to practice, to engage, so that collectively our voices can look at what we can do differently. Does that make sense to you? Because just the very nature of, or our fears around what will happen if we have the conversations, keeps us from coming up with the solutions that we could collectively come up with, if only we could suspend those fears or those worries. So part of my story, not all of it, that made these conversations difficult for me initially, is what you should know is that in graduate school, I've always been aware that I am a person of color. My area for my dissertation project, my PsyD project, was on racial identity development for African Americans. And one of the things that the research has shown is that Black families tend to talk with their children about the realities of racism. That they find ways to prepare their children. Now, they may not do it in a formal kind of educational way, but even I have 3 step kids that are adults, and I remember when my stepkids were younger, my husband would say things to them like, you know, you can't, Akila, you can't show up to work late like your white peers can. That's going to be treated differently. Or, Jovan, when you go to the mall, you know, here are the things that you need to make sure that how you behave in this way, because make sure that you behave in certain ways, because people are going to look at your behaviors differently. I tell people it's kind of like what parents do is it's kind of like stranger danger, where you're not trying to make your children afraid of all strangers, but you also want them to be aware that people will treat you a certain way, and it's not always good because of the color of your skin. Does this make sense to you? So, but the research also shows that white parents don't necessarily do that they're not talking to their white children or their mixed race children about whiteness, about racism. So my mom did not have the conversations with me. So again, it wasn't until graduate school. She didn't know that it was necessary. She grew up Catholic, married at a time when women's roles were to stay at home and to take care of children, and that's just what she did. She had my 4 older brothers and sisters. At the age of 19, she married and had them. They are blonde hair and blue eyes. I think they're adorable. They're not anymore, but they were. This is videotaped. Hopefully they won't watch it. But, you know, so here's the thing. She divorced, and that wasn't socially acceptable. It created a strain in her relationship with her parents. And then to make matters worse, she becomes pregnant with me. I'm born in 1965, so if you think about that time in our country, a lot of racial tension. You have some states where interracial marriages are still illegal. So here you've got this good Catholic girl that not only has had a child out of wedlock, right, but she has become pregnant by a Black man. So that, I mean, that pretty much, you know, severed her relationship with her parents. She stayed in touch with them. I've met them when they were alive, but they weren't a source of support. That was a very kind of strained relationship. I have a sister who is 18 months younger than me, so she did have another child. And sometimes my sister and I will talk now as adults because we didn't talk about our experiences of being multiracial as children. We talk about now just even the thankfulness that we have that we had each other because of the feelings of alienation and isolation and kind of the you know, feeling alone in some of the communities that we lived in or grew up with were very much prevalent in our lives. Now, my dad, you know, I have that kind of statistic family where, you know, where I grew up without a dad in my home. My father lived in Texas, had another family, and he left Seattle. He was in the military when I was still a baby. He didn't come back to Seattle until I was in the 4th grade. My sister had just died of something called viral encephalitis, and my dad comes back to Seattle, and he is in the front room when I literally lived across the street from my elementary school, and I walk in the door, and he is there. And I shared this story because I didn't have my dad in my life, I didn't have his family, and my mother didn't have her children's fathers or her own parents to help her raise 6 and later five children. I didn't meet my father's side of the family until about 2 years ago after my father passed away. So then going to Texas and meeting siblings and uncles and aunts and cousins and all of this. So my story's interesting in that my grandparents are a Black couple that didn't have children of their own, Marion and George Simmons. They see my mom in this predominantly Black and Asian neighborhood, and they're very curious about what is she doing in this neighborhood, right? I mean, this is over, almost 50 years ago. They eventually are introduced through mutual friends. And my mom starts working for them in their catering business. They did a lot of like catering for bar mitzvahs, a lot of kind of small-owned Black businesses, and they also had a barbecue restaurant. My mom starts calling them Mama and Papa. I am born, I start calling them Grandma and Grandpa. And they essentially become my family and my mother's extended family. All of my aunts and uncles, to this day, it's very hard to explain to my children how they are related to somebody, and they have just grown up to accept that if I say this is your aunt, and if this is your cousin, this is your cousin, because my family is made up of people who were not my blood relatives. Now, what's significant for me in this is that when I was first having formal conversations about diversity, my family and the community that I grew up in was proof for me that I didn't need to be a part of the conversation in the same ways that I thought that my colleagues needed to be in it. And so in other words, I knew that racism existed. I had experienced racism myself, but I saw myself as exempt from the conversation. And I'll tell you that this is one of my primary concerns for us all being videotaped in here today. I mean, I want to say that. I teach graduate courses, very intensive multicultural classes, and inevitably my students, about 100 students, 75 to 100 students in the class, and they will ask, can family members, friends attend? And I say, yes, they may, but they have to participate, because these conversations are very difficult. They elicit emotion, emotional reactions, emotional feelings, and they don't really work unless we do personal work. And we can't do personal work if we are being watched. Does this make sense to you? I'm not saying this to you to deliver any kind of subtle, I want to be direct and name that elephant in the room. That I was, the work I was needing to do at this time was to locate where I had taken in messages and suspend or let go of these relationships that became proof of my truth, that I didn't have biases or I didn't have stereotypes. And that really meant that I rolled up my sleeves and I unpacked even the dynamics of difference between me as a light-skinned woman and dark-skinned women in the world, that tension that exists. Very vulnerable, very painful work to go back and uncover what I was taking in my attitudes and assumptions and beliefs about groups.
May I
Yes.
you say something here?
Yes.
Because I think you bring up a really good point that I know that probably we're all feeling sitting here. And then we also have community members that are a part of us,
Yeah.
that are part of our public meetings, and they can't talk
Yeah.
because they can't interject. Like when you said there were 10 people in the room, 10 people can't participate in this
Yeah.
conversation, only the 6 of
Right.
us can, which makes this awkward setting. And so I don't know if maybe, because we can't have 3 board members at a time, if I can just suggest this while I'm thinking about it, maybe in the future we break off into 2 at a time and at least be able to have those dialogues and conversations where we're feeling
Right.
comfortable, and then we're not having a board meeting.
Yeah.
And maybe that's potentially, again, something that we wrap up or think about when we're talking about what kind of personal development that we can break off potentially with you.
Yeah.
And this can be our broad conversation, but to get to that
Yeah,
more
it is
intimate
certainly
level.
worth a place of conversation. This is not intellectual work,
Yeah.
right? This is not, it's referred, there's technical work, right? There's cognitive, okay, let me read a book and wrap my mind around the idea of stereotype threat, and then let me actually talk about where moments and times when I've experienced stereotype threat, which can bring up emotion. Or let me talk about times when, yeah, I did stereotype. Yes, I did. Those things are much more kind of private, and even without people watching us, we still feel very watched in it because there are other people in the room. Does this make sense to you? Does this make sense to you in the back? Yeah, so this is the work that changed my life, was to suspend my relationships with my family and the communities that I grew up with, and really sit in the experiences that my professors were trying to engage me in, so that, yes, I have Black grandparents, and yes, I have a wonderful relationship with them, but that doesn't change the fact that when I see Black men, that I have stereotypes about them. Does that make sense to you? That they become in many ways the, sometimes in conversations about stereotypes, we talk about exceptions, exceptions to our truth. In other words, we think of people as being different from other people that we have stereotypes towards. Did that make sense to you? So if I have stereotypes about whites. I might have stereotypes about white women, to get more specific. And so let's say...
Blonde white women.
Huh?
Blonde
And I
white
have them about blonde white women, right? And Italian white women, right? My sister-in-law is Italian. And so let's say, Amy, that you and I are good friends, and we, talk on the phone, and we go out and have a coffee together, and that sort of thing. I don't change my stereotypes about white women. I just change my stereotypes of you.
Yeah.
So you become an exception to the rule. Right? And that's one of the challenges. And so the work that I was doing in graduate school was trying to get me and others to see that our relationships are not proof of our truth, right? That those are very separate and distinct relationships. I think we're so adorable, But I have a brother that's gay, which also added to the complexity and the difficulty in me engaging in formal conversations, because now I have a brother, and I have friends, and I have uncles who are gay, and all of these again, relationships to me conveyed that that I didn't judge. And my brother was not only was he gay, but he also we knew he was gay. But I didn't know what gay was, Dawn. But I knew that my brother was different. I knew from his behaviors and the ways in which he, the games he played and things like that. I knew he was. I knew something was different about him. I'm sure my mother always knew that he was gay. So that when he came out, so to speak, there was no big surprise, right? There was no ceremony around it or what. There was no shock from the family, nor did anyone kind of disown him as a result. My brother's friends, whose families disowned them, would often come and spend holidays with us. My mother was very active in the gay community, and my brother was, for example, he was Miss Gay Seattle. That was something, that my family was so proud of, that we're going around and sharing with other people. He dressed in drag and did a lot of performances. So again, I'm in gay bars at the age of 19, sneaking into these nightclubs with my sister, to watch him perform. I also have a brother and sister, Robert and Judy. What's fascinating to me about my mom and the incredible woman that she was during this particular time is that she takes in my brother's friend, Robert, and his sister at times when life got really difficult for them. They came from an alcoholic and abusive home and lived down the street from us. They're significantly older than my sister, my younger sister and I. So we would come home and sometimes they'd be living with us and, and sometimes they wouldn't. And they were just always and still are a part of our lives. And I also have a stepsister. My mother did remarry and divorce her father, and she came into our lives when she was 2 years old. My brother's a Republican. I was asking my mom the other day, do you think Mike's still a Republican? Kind of a thing. Because it was, it was clear that in some ways his thinking was different from the rest of the family, but we certainly didn't love him any differently because of his political viewpoints. And for, really my biggest point in this is that the diversity in my family really just goes on and on and on. In my family, we were taught, like many of us were, to not judge people because of differences. So to enter into graduate school and realize that I very much judge people because of differences, and that I do it automatically without even knowing it. I'm going to share my Where I'm From poem with you. I would love it if you were interested in writing your own Where I'm From poem. It's a great way to kind of unpack the messages that you have taken in or received about differences and the ways in which kind of different times in your life really influence and shape who we are today. I'm always thinking about that my children and your children and the children that are in our schools, that they're living their Where I'm From poems right now. And that as board members, really, as you think about policy and practices and our teachers think about how to best educate our kids, that we have the opportunity to shape their Where I'm From stories to one where they feel that children get to write about feeling included and a sense of belongingness. Rather than my experiences, which were often otherness and feelings of difference in negative ways rather than seeing it as being positive. I am from an Irish and Scottish world, translated white, who never fully accepted me, but never quite rejected me, like the way they did my dark-skinned sisters. I am from African queens who took pride in the gaps between their teeth until years of enslavement divided us with, you think you're better than me, don't you? That's where I'm from. I'm from a laid-back, pool-playing, absent father who had children I've never met, and your daddy loves you, honey. He's a good man. I'm from a pimp for a stepdad, Lester Lee Wingate III. But there were still fun times in Ketchikan and Valdez, and hey, we got a new baby sister now. That's where I'm from. I'm from a mother who made us a family when her own turned the other way, who loved me with all her being, who believed that I was beautiful, whose eyes would beam with pride at every step I would take, who would take away all my pain if she could. You have the world to fight, don't fight one another, shotgun in her hand if anyone was to ever try to hurt one of her babies. And don't judge one another kind of mother. That's where I'm from. I'm from Marion and George's Barbecue and Catering on 23rd and Judkins. Grandparents who found the blessing of being grandparents in me, piled high on their bed, watching old black and white, seeing whites dressed as Chinese and Indians, playing penny ante poker, homemade potato chips, costumes, jams and jellies, and a kitchen that always smelled oh so good. Everything from scratch except for the closet full of toilet paper and paper towels, because you just never know. And how come you don't have more black friends, honey? That's where I'm from. I'm from Myrtle Creek, Oregon. White grandparents who were ashamed of the color of my skin, hearing taunts of nigger go home, where teachers pretended they didn't hear, and a white grandmother who believed if she told me to just ignore it, that I actually could. Can't wait to go home because names do hurt me. I'm from gumbo, oxtail stew, collard greens, Mahalia Jackson on cleanup Sundays, Michael Jackson's Enjoy Yourself, Step into the Groove, and doing the bump if you can. I'm from summer trips to the Oregon coast to visit Father Timmy and Uncle Billy and Mommy, who's Jim Crow? Whistle while you work, Nixon is up. You kids knock that off. I'm from Coopville, Washington, loving summer life on the farm until, what's that you're putting in your hair? And you must be good at basketball. I don't need to ask you why you won't ask me to dance, because I already know, because you nicknamed me Shadow and played games called nigger knocking and then said you were sorry that you wanted to invite me to your sleepover, but couldn't. I'm from a family who loves me, but a world that still judges me because of the color of my skin. Where are you from? Thank you. Some water. And you know, those stories shape us. They shape our perspective of things. The experiences that we have shape our perspectives, and our perspectives become our reality. And a lot of times we are coming from different places in these stories, in these conversations. And it has to do with our experiences. Where did we grow up? What were the messages that we were taught? What wasn't said to us growing up, as well as what was said to us, right? All of those things can matter. And then how does my story then influence the way in which I trust or don't trust people who belong to groups that I identify with? And all of that is happening in our schools when our parents are taking our children to school for the first day. You know, what is the lens in which they're looking at the classroom or the teacher through? And so we've got to get better at understanding these experiences, as well as thinking about how do we make decisions in the best interest of children. And we can only do that when we understand what our children's experiences are. So that means that we have to get outside of our own experiences and to understand others. So what I did with the group a couple weeks ago was I talked about what does our work to become culturally competent look like? What is this journey? What as you have this strategic plan that you've developed, like so how do we get to this place of closing the opportunity gap? What are the things that we need to be mindful of? What are some of the conversations that we need to have? And so how do we engage? And I love that Glenn Singleton refers to it as courageous conversations, because it takes courage to talk about these things outside of private kind of settings. Because when we go to talk about it, we don't know how people will hear it or how people will receive what it is that we have said. My goal, and every time I do these workshops, I always want people to have a little bit more understanding of themselves, right? And that they have better understanding of other people's experiences, so that we're not just looking at where we're similar, but also where we're different. Because where we're different is where the difficult conversation comes in. So today, I'm going to share with you the framework for cultural competence. I want to talk with you about stereotypes. Are you all reading Whistling Vivaldi, or are some of you reading Kendall's book? You're all reading Whistling Vivaldi.
I don't think we got that.
Okay, that's all right. We'll talk
That'll
about.
probably be a great next.
Yeah, so I love this book. I've been doing a lot of work around stereotypes, but his book really helped me to understand some things that I hadn't understood before. So we'll talk and integrate that into our conversation today. And by the way, this is a great time to ask any questions about what you're reading. If you have thoughts, just jot things down, and please interrupt me. Right? So I come from, I don't know, have you ever been where you've engaged a group of, you sat at a table and you are the only person of color, or only white person, or one of few, right? The person who is not African American is what I'm trying to get at, right? And you're sitting solely with black people. To me, it's like playing double dutch. This is what I tell people, like there's this cultural dynamic that exists in the African community, in the African American community, and how we engage. We don't tend to raise hands. We don't tend to okay, let's make sure that everybody gets a turn, right? It's like, if you want to be a part of this conversation, you need to just jump in. So I don't mind if you interrupt me. I don't mind if you say, hey, can you go back 3 slides ago? Let's try to make this where I can, what I'm saying is I have to do the work to remember to stop and pause and ask you if you have questions, but if you can meet me where I'm at and just jump in and ask questions. Sound good? All right, excellent. Swallowing ice cube. Okay, so Glenn Singleton. Anybody hear of him before? Glenn Singleton, he goes around to school districts. He's been in Bellevue School District, Seattle Public Schools. Like me, his area of focus or expertise is on race relations. And he came up with these norms, and I'll tell you, I think, Janet, I think of these norms as tools for us, that he's really describing for us with the norms on how we can get good at having these conversations. Like when we talk about race or racism, let's use race as an example. It's not if you will make a mistake. It's not if you will offend someone. It's when you offend someone, right? That's what having conversations about difference elicits. People have different experiences, they have different stories, and you are likely to step on someone's toes, right? So when you offend someone, so this requires that if we're going to have these conversations, we know that we're going to offend, we've got to take risks, jump into the conversation knowing that we're likely to offend someone anyway. There's a psychologist by the name of Dr. Weil. He does work around couples counseling, and I saw this model at one of his workshops that I just loved because I think it applies to these conversations in race. And really the idea in race conversations or in couples is that when you offend someone, the conversation is likely to go three ways. One is that the person who is offended may get so upset that they do something that's called predatory listening. This is language that a woman by the name of Peggy McIntosh uses. So Peggy McIntosh talks about, or predatory listening is this idea where I don't hear what you say anymore from that point on that you offended me. I'm just thinking about what it is that I'm going to say to get you back, right? Or to put you in your place. It's really this kind of attack style. Now, I hear people sometimes people think of attack as like this really kind of aggressive or angry kind of, but attacking doesn't have to be that way. It can be just making people feel small, making people feel bad for what they've said. You know, sometimes I'm driving down the street, and inevitably, you know, one day I'm going to do some improper road etiquette. I'm going to do something wrong on the road. There are people that will toot their horns lightly. They just want me to know for my own safety. Like, they want me to know that's not a good idea, right? Going down a one-way street, you know, the wrong way is not a good idea. They want me to know for my safety. But there are some people that will just lay on the horn. They will let you have it. And, you know, they scare you, right? Just like, oh my goodness, as if they had never done some improper road etiquette, right? And that's what attackers do. Now, when you attack people, it tends to lead us to this relationship of becoming enemies. I shouldn't even call it relationship, right? That it becomes this us against them type of mentality. Attacking, we know, doesn't work. I attack. It's one of my styles of communication. I tend to use it more with people that I have no relationship with, because when I attack you, Sandy, if I don't have any relationship with you, I get to feel good for having told you off, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? And I can go to my friend and come over to Larry and say, I sure told Sandy off today, and my friends will usually affirm me and make me feel good for the way in which I treated somebody really poorly. But the truth of the matter is nobody grows or learns from it. You know, nobody has ever come to me and said, you know, thank you, Dr. Hollins, I appreciate the way you attacked me. I learned so much, right? People don't. They attack back. They become defensive. They're essentially protecting their identity. Now, some people in these conversations, they don't attack, right? They're not doing that waiting to get you kind of stance. They're more likely to be avoiders. What avoiders do in these conversations is they wait till break, right? They wait until break, and then they go outside and they talk with people they're close with about that thing that you said. Now, here's the thing is, I believe that most people are good, kind, loving, moral people. I'm 50 years old. I'm not naive. I don't think all people, you know, have good intentions. But I do know that most people are good people, and if they knew better, they would do things differently. So usually when someone says something that is offensive, they often don't know that the thing that they said was offensive. Okay? So if we are going to have conversations about race, courageous conversations, what we've got to get good at is engaging. Because while attacking leads to enemies, avoiders lead to strangers, where engagement can lead to allies. So what that really looks like is, if I offend you, that you become curious about what it is that I've said. what have my experiences been? What is my story that led me to say the things that I've said? What have I been taught? Does this make sense to you? If I become angry at you, even if I attack you, that you become curious about why am I engaging in that way, to try to better understand where people are coming from. So that, and the thing is that it works both ways. So it's easy for me to do it this way. So Sandy, if Sandy offended Amy, then Amy, rather than sitting in silence, you would be willing and open to be wondering why she said or did that thing, and that you would also be curious, Sandy, about. Now I always get this mixed up. Do you get where am I going with this? That's how
Try to learn.
you try to learn from each other. Now, there's a strategy I won't talk with you about in detail, but it doesn't mean that the conversations always have to happen in that moment. Sometimes we need to step back and think about it and think about what we're going to say. But that's what engagement looks like, with genuine curiosity. There's a saying that goes, when the going gets tough, that we turn to wonder. Wonder what's going on with you, and wonder what's going on with me. And I think that's how we move away from that us against them mentality and try to get better at understanding that we've all been socialized to take in these messages, and we're all doing harm in some way unless we're intentional about unpacking and looking at ourselves.
I think another thing of what you were saying about, so since you said interrupt, because that's actually.
Yeah, please do. Is
Italian
that your Italian
do that,
style?
yeah, talk over each other. Is that also when people need to step away too, I like what you said about needing that time to step away and being able to come back, that it's okay to step away.
Yeah.
And that you give that space to step away.
Yeah.
So I know for myself, I need that moment sometimes too. And this is, letting you guys know sometimes what my style is. Sometimes I need to walk out of a room, get my thoughts collected, and come back in. And then re-engage.
Yeah, excellent.
Because
excellent.
if the environment for me, so I'm going to be vulnerable on camera, I'm with everybody here. If the environment for me gets too intense,
Yeah.
I am afraid that I won't be able to be clear about what I'm thinking, and that I may not. I guess for me, the best thing to do at that point is to take a break and not have that offend people and just go, she needs a break. And so sometimes when it gets intense in here, I just want sometimes to walk out and go, I just need to breathe for a second and walk back in. That's like my style, but it's not, sometimes I'm afraid to do that because I don't want it to look like it's offending anybody or that I'm upset, but just that it's intense.
Yeah.
And that intensity gets overwhelming sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know we all feel that way, but just, I would like to feel the freedom that if I need to go in a bathroom break or anything, that it's not personalized, and that's just what I need to do for myself, and then come back and re-engage in the conversation.
Right.
And so I love that you said that.
Yeah, and sometimes it's more than a few minutes or even an hour, or sometimes these conversations, you think about, we're talking about things that our country have not done a good job of teaching us how to have conversations about these things, right? So sometimes, I might need a month before I can, particularly if you've offended me in some way, right? Before I can actually come back and engage you, particularly, if I'm hurt in some way. So, it's called circling back around. And doing even just what you just did right now involves risk taking, right? To step in and say, this is my style. Now here's the thing about it, is that when I come back to you and I want to try to engage you in this re-engage you in whatever it is that I've experienced with you, when I try to re-engage you, you may not want to re-engage me. You may not want to have that conversation with me. We're talking about having courageous conversations about race. And so this idea of non-closure, or expect and accept non-closure, is that I have to let go sometimes of the harm that I've done to people. That it's not just this pretty bow that you get to say, well, I want to be liked by you, and I'm trying to fix this thing, and I want you to meet me where I'm at. I'm now ready. That the complexities of human beings means that sometimes I have to walk away and say, you know what, I harmed Janet in that, and she's not ready to give me grace, and that's just where she is. Does this make sense to you? So we do, and I will with We have it scheduled where I will do large group work with everyone and then some smaller group work with just your principals. And we will unpack kind of some of those deeper messages that are kind of underlying how we want to show up in relationship with people and how those things can become barriers. Speaking your truth, this one is tough. Even as I explain this to people, it's interesting that we want to place the blame for institutional isms on everybody else, but we have a really hard time looking at our individual role in it. So, I used to be the director of equity and race in Seattle Public Schools. I'm very familiar with the fact that we have a lot of the district is the problem language, right? The board is the problem, the superintendent is the problem, the teacher is the problem, the parents are the problem, the students are the problem, and we go on and on. And so in this, it's whenever we are always looking out there to find where the problems are, not that they don't exist out there, we are missing the opportunity to look at how we are showing up, how our decision making is impacting students' lives, and what is within our locus of control to change. Because the truth of the matter is that we all have a role in it. Community has a role, parents have a role, etc. So speaking your truth is coming from a place of I, so we facilitate these workshops with the people who are in the room, right? Not what we don't have any control over. Experiencing discomfort. Most of you have had, whether it's formal or informal, that these conversations are very uncomfortable. And if we wait to become comfortable, what will happen? Right, yeah, nothing. So what we talk about as a norm is becoming comfortable with the discomfort. That we acknowledge that yes, we're going to feel uncomfortable, but we still have these conversations in spite of that. And that's why taking risks is such an important one, because we're still having the conversation knowing that there's a risk, knowing that we're going to be uncomfortable with it. Listening for understanding, that's about intent. That's about impact instead of intent. So most of you probably experienced in your life where you've gone to tell someone that they offended you in some way. Whether it doesn't have to be about race. And it's not uncommon for people to say, when you go to tell them that, they'll say things like, well, that's not what I meant. Or it was just a joke. Or why do you have to take everything so seriously, Dawn? Or why does everything have to be about race for you? In other words, what happens is that people make it about the way in which you see the situation, the way in which you're interpreting it. Rather, when you go to tell them that they've offended you, rather than reflecting, rather than saying, let me learn something from this. We say that when someone goes to tell you that you've offended, that they're really offering you a gift. That they are taking risk, that there's something about you that they likely see in you, that they believe that it's worth it to go ahead and share that with you. Because people who exist on the margins don't tell a lot of people when they've been offended. They will often do the avoider and go to the side and talk to someone who they think can connect or relate to their experience and tell that person. In other words, they'll go to that person and say, you're not going to believe what a white woman just said to me today, right? But they're not having the conversation with you because the risk is that you will invalidate their experience by saying it's about how you heard it rather than how they experienced it. If we could get good at sitting in the impact, in other words, being open to hearing what people have, how people are experiencing us. This work is not about whether or not we are good or bad. We are good people, right? You are here in educate. You are volunteering your time as board members. It has nothing to do with your goodness and everything to do with how, in spite of our goodness, we continue to do harms because of the messages that we have often unconsciously taken in. And then the no fixing, I'll tell you, as we do work, and most of the work that we do is activities, they're exercises that we lead people through. And emotion will come up, anger, pain, past stories, frustration, guilt, and shame, all of these different feelings. And when people when that starts to come in the room, it's not uncommon for people to now get really uncomfortable. I care about you, Janet. I don't want to see you in pain. I care about you, Larry. I don't want to see you angry. And so this work is about paying attention to how your discomfort with what other people are feeling or experiencing is getting in the way of just allowing you to just sit with what people are experiencing. Because within this work, we're trying to bring that out, right? We're trying to get people to get in touch with that